Uh-oh. All right. That's perfect, yeah. All right, everyone, thank you for coming. This is our final Healthy Shop speaker series of the school year. We'll definitely have it again next year, but this is our last one. And this is Kyla Yorkoski. Yorkoski, okay, I'm so close. And she's with Austin Teen Therapy, and she's here to talk with us about DBT, which I'm really excited to learn from her as well. So I'll let Kyla take over and tell us more about herself and then get started. And there are handouts in case you missed them.
Yes. Yeah, of course. Yeah, there should be one handout of the PowerPoint, so, make it a little bit easier. It has the necessary information, but also hopefully space if you want to take notes. Hopefully it's big enough everyone can see. I tried to print it effectively, but with big enough font. So my name is Kyla. I work with Austin Teen Therapy, which is a private practice group in the Austin area. We specifically serve teens and young adults. However, for the past 3 or 4 years, I've worked in like PHP and IOP levels of care, which is essentially for folks who need a little more support. If you think of like hospitalization, folks who are struggling with pretty significant issues, self-harm, suicidality, all of those kinds of things, substance use. These are programs, they can be 7 days a week to 3 days a week, that help support them. So I have a lot of experience working with folks who have higher needs, and that's where I got a lot of my experience in working with DBT. So I think I'll get into it a little bit more during my presentation, but essentially I really love DBT as like a skills-based therapy. I'm not a specifically DBT structured therapist. There are lots of programs out in the Austin area that I'd be happy to talk about. But I do like to incorporate it into the work I do, and I hope that today I can bring a little bit about kind of like skill, things that you can take home with you in order to help you, help your teens, help students. What do we got? We're mostly parents here? Yes. Grandparent, okay, perfect. So yeah, to help your young person. Okay, so essentially what is DBT? Folks, has anyone ever heard of DBT before? Awesome, what have y'all heard about it?
That my son might need it.
Okay, yeah.
It's more skills and active rather than kind of trying to learn necessarily why, but more what you can do going forward.
Yes, yeah, perfect. Anything you learned about it?
Actually, my daughter went through this training at IOP.
Okay.
I just want to refresh it.
Yeah, perfect. So a little bit of different understanding. DBT stands for Dialectical Behavioral Therapy. I've had kids call it diabolical brain torture. I feel like the name, while I could go into it and how it explains DBT, it doesn't really super duper help understand, at least from my perspective, like what DBT is. So DBT, as you said, is a skills-based therapy. So it's a little less talk therapy, and it's a little more what can we do, how can we address these concerns, etc. It's really helpful for folks who struggle to manage their emotions. So think like high anxiety, anger, maybe people are having outbursts, maybe they're engaging in problematic behaviors or what we call target behaviors like self-harm, substance use, other risk-taking behaviors. And it helps us replace those with more skillful types of interventions. The one thing that DBT really, so dialectical behavioral therapy is essentially looking at the dialectic, not as like in a language, but like both sides of something. And so the third point on here is we want to experience the full range of emotions. We don't want to, push away those big emotions. We don't want to subdue them. We want to experience them, but then be able to respond to them in an appropriate way. So that's one thing I really like about DBT is you're still allowed to experience your feelings. You're still allowed to experience the emotions that are coming up for you, but you're not going to necessarily respond in the way that you may have traditionally done that's been unhelpful. Any questions about that so far? Okay, wonderful. I'll probably ask that throughout, try and engage y'all a little bit more than just talking at you the whole time. So there's 5 main components of DBT. These 5 main components, if you were to do a full DBT program, if you were to really go into all the different skills, which unfortunately we're not going to have time for today, you would touch on mindfulness. The goal of mindfulness is to increase our emotional awareness. You would touch on emotion regulation, so very self-explanatory, helping us regulate our emotions. You would touch on distress tolerance. This is a set of skills to help us combat impulsivity, to help us when we're really dysregulated and we might want to engage in risk-taking behaviors. Distress tolerance skills are very helpful for that. Interpersonal effectiveness is a very fancy way of saying effective communication or good communication with others. And then middle path, which is a super great, I feel like, very conceptual side of the DBT elements where 2 things can be true at the same time. This is a really great area for what effective parenting skills, like what's too strict versus what's too lenient. I really wanted to get into middle path, but I really wanted to give y'all some more concrete skills today that I thought would be more effective. So essentially, we are going to focus on the emotion regulation and distress tolerance skills for today. So hopefully I won't get too deep in the weeds with all of this. I have a tendency to sometimes do that, so feel free to slow me down or stop me if it's like, wait, Kyla, what are we talking about again? So the emotion regulation and distress tolerance, essentially these are skills that you can take with you. You can practice them yourself. I think all of us can benefit from some DBT skills. And you can also help your teens, your kiddos, folks of all ages can use DBT too when they're feeling distressed. Like, here are some concrete things that you can do. All right. So before we jump into that, I think something that's super duper important to go over is what we call this scale, the subjective units of distress, or the acronym for it is SUDS. So not like soap suds, but distress SUDS. And this is a scale, it can be 0 to 10 or 0 to 100, as this image shows, of how distressed you are. So especially if you have someone who is maybe not so in tune with their emotions, maybe they're not really familiar what emotions are coming up, the SUDS scale can be super effective for just like, hey, where are you at on a 0 to 10 scale? You know what, I'm feeling like I'm at a 3 today. Okay, cool, that's awesome. Or I'm feeling like I'm at a 7. All right, let's maybe intervene a little bit and figure out how we can do something differently. So the reason I bring this up is because the emotion regulation set of skills and the distress tolerance set of skills are effective for different levels of distress. So if we're relatively regulated but perhaps distressed, we want to use our emotion regulation skills. So that would be a 3 to 7 or a 30 to 70 in this range here. We might have some mild distress, some moderate to severe distress, but we're still essentially able to function. We're still essentially able to do the things that we need to do in order to get through the day, but it was probably pretty uncomfortable. Emotion regulation skills are a lot more cognitive, and I'll get into them a little bit in the next slide. They take a little more brain power. I really like to tell folks, like, your prefrontal cortex, your executive functioning area of your brain, the part in teens that is developing the most, which is unfortunate, or it's fortunate that it's developing, but it can lead to some maybe not so great choices, when you're a teenager. This area of your brain is not necessarily working when you're highly dysregulated. So when you're past a 70, this part of your brain is shutting down. You might be going into fight or flight mode. You might be going into shutdown mode. And that's when our very simple, much less cognitive distress tolerance skills are effective. The reason I bring this up is because in my experience working with teens and even adults, people love distress tolerance skills. They're easy, they're simple, they're relatively not challenging you. I mean, they're challenging it a little bit, but they're not super challenging as far as compared to emotion regulation. And so people like to use them all the time. And when we use them all the time, they're not super effective at actually dealing with the issues that we need to deal with. So, from everything I just said, if you're relatively regulated but uncomfortable, use emotion regulation skills. And if you're like, you know what, actually I'm really not doing well, I'm really struggling to focus, I'm maybe having like a little bit of an outburst, or if your child is having a bit of an outburst, let's use distress tolerance skills first to help us get back to a more regulated state. Any questions about that? Okay, wonderful. So let's get into the actual skills. So we're going to start with emotion regulation. I feel like most of this presentation is going to be on the skills, emotion regulation and distress tolerance. This is the meaty part of the presentation. Emotion regulations, number one, they want to help us understand the emotions we're feeling, the emotions we're experiencing. I feel like so many times with young people, and again, people of all ages, when we don't really know what's going on, it's really hard to address and be skillful in order to manage those emotions. So for some people, I know they're just doing fine, la 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 la, and then all of a sudden it's like, ooh, an anger outburst. They're flying off the handle. Or they're feeling fine, they're doing something at school, and then someone says something or a teacher says something, and all of a sudden they're just like, oh, I want to self-harm. Emotions don't really happen instantaneously. There is a lead up. It can take a lot of time to understand that lead up, but the more we understand not just the 0 to 60, but the 0 to 20 and 40 and 50, we are able to slow those emotions down to better intervene. So emotional awareness is a key part of emotion regulation. The other parts is with DBT, it is really effective for people who may just naturally have higher intensity, higher duration, and higher frequency of strong emotions. So some of us, I don't know, I like to talk about babies. You have some babies that are like, they're super chill, they're just naturally easy to soothe, no problem. And then you have those certain babies that will just cry. It doesn't matter what you do. I'm sure if you've had multiple children, you have one that was like really easy to take care of, and everything was like, oh, this is great. I have a friend who just actually had a baby, and I'm like, how are you doing? She's like, I'm doing fine. He sleeps, he's doing everything. I'm like, okay, wait till you have your second one. So some folks are just naturally more regulated, and some folks, and of course it's a spectrum, some folks just struggle more, and it's a biological. Is biological, and it just is how we naturally are. And so emotion regulation helps us reduce that emotional vulnerability. It helps us reduce the intensity, frequency, and duration of some of those really strong emotions so that we can feel more in control of what's going on inside of us. And then lastly, without getting too much into it, have any of y'all heard of like feeling states versus like moods? How like one is just, it's in passing, but then one, if you really get into it a little bit, it becomes a mood. It can really take over. I can't remember the specific statement that I've heard before. But essentially DBT looks at emotional suffering is when we get stuck in those emotions, when we start to dwell on them, when we start to fight with them. Most emotions will only last about 30 minutes. You might be like, what? That doesn't feel accurate. But if we are able to accept the emotion, to take it in, breathe it out, feel it, respond to it, whatever, technically it's about 30, did I say 30 seconds? Oh my God.
No, you said 30 minutes.
Oh, I said 30
Yeah.
minutes. Okay, ooh, yeah, 30 minutes. it's when we get stuck in these emotions that it will lead to emotional suffering. And so emotion regulation, the goal is to help us feel, experience, not respond impulsively, and then move on with our day. Any questions? Okay. So what are emotion regulation skills? Let's see. My ABC please is a long one. Do you have a pen?
A pen?
Yeah, like a whiteboard marker?
Oh, let me see.
I've meant to ask before and then I got really,
That we can do.
if not, don't worry about it. If not, whiteboard marker. So you have the list of, or the sheet of PowerPoint slides. The other sheet I gave you is essentially a front and back sheet of emotion regulation and distress tolerance skills. So I gave that to you without a lot of context, but we'll be going through some of those skills today, so you can take them home with you. Thank you so much. And refer to them later, because I'm going to be talking about a lot of information. So I wanted to provide this for y'all to be like, okay, what did Kyla talk about? Oh, she talks about ABC please. Oh, ABC please is looking at the sheet, X, Y, Z. I really like to, I'm a visual person. I like to write when I talk or teach or do whatever. I really struggle to talk and write at the same time, so I will do my best. So the first skill that I really want to talk about, I'm going to go into it super duper briefly, is, it's a beautiful pen. You know what, actually, I don't know if I'm going to use that. So ABC please. If you look on your emotion regulation sheet, on the emotion regulation side of skills, can you all see the ABC please section? Perfect, okay. So Marsha Linehan, the woman who created DBT, she loves acronyms. Like, she really loves acronyms. And this is probably one of my favorite acronyms because it makes the least amount of sense. So, the ABC part, great, that's awesome. The please part, I'm like, really, this is the best you could do? But it's fun. So ABC please is essentially a set of various skills that help not just, it's like this background for emotion, it's the foundation for our emotional experiences. So the first part is kind of what we do, and the please part is more of like our physical well-being. So I'll briefly go through each of these just so you kind of have a brief idea, and if you have any questions, you can let me know. But hopefully it'll give just kind of introduction so you're like, oh, okay, I kind of know what this is and can refer back to it later. So A is accumulating positive experiences. I like to tell people, just do fun things. What do you do that's fun? I'm sure all of us have hobbies or things, places that we enjoy doing. And how do we feel when we do enjoyable things?
Happy. Yeah.
We feel good. We feel happy. Yeah. Unfortunately, when we struggle with emotions, we can struggle to do things that we enjoy. And that can kind of have this cyclical effect of, I'm not doing things I enjoy, so I'm more depressed, and so then I'm not doing the things I enjoy, so I'm more depressed, so I'm not doing the things I enjoy, etc. So accumulating positive experiences is essentially, what can you do that's enjoyable, that's fun, in order to build your mood up, and to have that kind of reserve a little bit for when you're not feeling so good. Okay. Doing okay on time. The B is very similar. This is building mastery. So for building mastery, it's not just doing things you enjoy, but it's doing things that you can get better at and show accomplishment through. So does anyone have any or does anyone have a kid who is in like an extracurricular or like a sport or music or anything? Perfect. What does your child do?
Baseball.
Baseball. Okay, great. I actually was talking with a client about baseball. Is there like, what do they do in baseball?
Well, every day he does lots.
Okay.
He's on the varsity baseball team.
Okay. Is there a certain position that he plays?
Well, he's the only sophomore on the team, so he's kind of used where they need him.
Okay,
So like he might do, he has practice in the morning and practice in the afternoon, and then he might go to a hitting lesson in the afternoon or some other lessons. I don't know. He schedules them because we're not driving this. So,
Yeah.
But yeah, there's building up mastery for sure.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And is there ever a time that he's able to accomplish something? Has a good hit, or he does something well in a game that he's like, yes, that's so awesome.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That feeling that you worked really hard for something and then you achieve it, ooh, that's a good experience. And so that's what building mastery is all about. How can I challenge myself? So if your kid is interested in guitar, if your kid is interested in painting, there is that challenge of initially like, oh, I suck at this, I'm not good, I'm never gonna get better. Okay, so can I encourage them to keep going so that when they do achieve something, it's like, oh, look mom, look what I just did, look grandma, look what I just did. It's that really exciting feeling that not only you worked hard for something, which I think, if you just get really great experiences, that's one thing, but when you work hard for something and then you achieve it, ooh, that's great. So we have accumulate positive experiences, we have building mastery. Our C, I'm really not gonna get too much into this one, but it's coping ahead. So do I have a stressful situation coming up? Yes. What is that stressful situation going to entail? X, Y, Z. Okay, how can I cope for it? Kids hate doing this. We had a whole group where I used to work that was just about coping ahead for something coming up in the week, and they never wanted to do it. They were like, please. It was on a Saturday, so that probably also was, a reason why. But they hated doing it. But it is really helpful. Instead of ruminating and just thinking, oh my gosh, all these bad things are gonna happen, we actually slow that down and make it more effective. So I think I'm a big fan of like writing it down. Here are all my worries. It's my first day of school. I'm really worried that I can't find my locker. I'm really worried that I'm going to be late to my first class. Okay, those are very possible things to happen. How can you cope for them? And so that's what coping ahead is about. Question?
I'm in a different position because I've already been where y'all are. And that reminds me, I'm so glad to hear that. I lost a son whose son is who I'm concerned about, because he's lost his daddy at 12. And my other son will not cope ahead of time with emotional situations, i.e. me going.
Mm-hmm.
At some point I'm going to die.
Yeah.
He will not discuss it.
Yeah.
And I keep telling him it worries me more because he won't discuss it. So this is not just for teenagers, it's probably for some of you, maybe with older parents or with parents.
Yeah.
His brother died at 40 and his daddy at 67 within a 6-year period, so he can't deal with it.
Right.
So this is interesting for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great example of emotion regulation, how we do need to face some of those really challenging emotions. Very big, right? You're talking about grief and loss, experiences that can be super overwhelming for folks. So maybe he's on that SUD scale. Maybe when he starts to think about that, he gets past a 7. Maybe we need to get to those distress tolerance skills for him to be able to cope ahead. So that's a great example. Thank you. Yeah.
What do you do, like with your own child, like if they just flat out say, no, I am not going to write this down, I am not going to do the exercise you would like me to do, even though they may understand logically that it would be beneficial, but to their parent, they're so happy to say, no, I'm not gonna do that,
Yeah, I feel like they just really they're teenagers. Like, they don't want to listen to me.
They
I had a perfect answer for what to do when a teenager says no, or if anyone has a perfect answer, actually, let me just go to the audience, let me know.
Any suggestions?
Right. I think, so obviously all of this can be very official. You can't, I'm like, write it down, do worksheets, do all this. It could be a lot more simple of just like, hey, I'm noticing you're nervous about XYZ. What are you nervous about? Oh, nothing, maybe they'll brush it off. Maybe they'll be like, oh, I'm kind of nervous about blah, blah, blah. Okay, if that happens, what do you think you could do? Again, they might brush it off. Coming in at a little more of like a casual standpoint might kind of be a sneaky way to get in there. And they might just shut it down. So I think just continuing to try. Let me not go on too much of a tangent, but I think the biggest thing is just validation. Who's familiar with validation? Okay, cool. That I think is the best way to get a kid to open up a little bit more. It's not going to happen in one try. It might not happen in 100 tries. But the more you just acknowledge, like, hey, I noticed you're stressed about that. Yeah, that sounds like it sucks. Rather than being like, pick your chin up off the floor and just keep going. Some of these more traditional that we intend to be helpful, but ways that can kind of shut them down. So yeah, really validating the feeling, even if they're not going to talk. I would really recommend, I won't get into it, but what's the website? It's called Emotion Focused Family Therapy. Has some great PDF templates or on their website of what to do when a kid says no or shuts down, and what to do when a kid is angry and doesn't want to talk. If we have time at the end, I can find like the exact website, but it's Emotion Focused Family Therapy. I don't remember if it's like the Institute or what, but they have really great coaching strategies for what to say when a kid shuts down. What to
It's
say.
EFFT.org.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Wait, do it again.
EFFT.org.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's
One thing I've dealt with my grandson is to let him think it was his idea, which is not a normal thing for me. But it's the beauty of being a grandparent is you learn the hard way, all the things you might have done right or wrong. And after his daddy died, I put him in therapy that summer. He stays with me every summer. And so the next summer, which was last summer, I said, do you want to go back? And he said, no, I don't need it. Well, of course he did. But he said, I'm fine. I said, well, Morgan would probably love to hear that. Because she's been emailing me, how's he doing? How's Maddox doing? Whatever. And I said, she'd probably love to hear that. Why don't you just go see her and tell her how fine you're doing? And he said, well, I would like to see her dog. She had a therapy dog. He said, I would like to see her dog again. And then he went.
yeah.
And it was good. But before with my kids, I would have said, no, you're going.
Right.
Which, and I did that with his daddy for years, and it didn't work. The therapy didn't work at all. So, anyway, that's just
I also
something.
think I was gonna say, I've done this with kids at the school and in my private practice and even my own kids, is sometimes you might bring up an idea they're not totally sold on, or they say no, or like, and then sometimes I'll find like an image or something on Instagram or something, and I'll just send it to them and be like, oh, this is exactly what what I was, trying to explain to you. And so sometimes it just gets them kind of going and thinking, and like a lot of the athletes, and my kids are too, some of this, a lot of it's like daily, you're just, before every practice, before every game, you should be doing this. And then sometimes when you can find like the pro athlete doing it or someone else they can relate to, I think sometimes they're more willing to try it. And when you're kind of putting it, especially when you're the parent, when it's coming from you as the parent versus the counselor or the therapist or whoever, I think sometimes that see,
I have
want to see
allergies,
it.
not infections.
Yeah.
Do groups help with that, like if they have team groups where they're all learning those like skills together and then kind of that becomes like the norm of the group? You know, I don't know if that would help or would that backfire? Depends on the situation.
So it depends on the situation. I do think groups are awesome because it's kind of, like this kind of atmosphere. It's teaching, everyone's learning about it, everyone's kind of on the same page. It's kind of forced, but you're all forced together kind of thing.
Right.
It's always really awesome when you have one kid that's like, nah, y'all, this actually does work, having that relatability. Ooh, I love those kids. You go teach class. And, sometimes it's just a collective, we're learning about dialectical brain torture, like, and then they all can rally around how much they hate it, but maybe still learn it. So it varies a little bit, but I do think groups can, just having similar people with you learning about the same things rather than just like one-on-one being like, I'm the only one who's learning this. Yes, and. Yes. Any other questions or thoughts? So for the please section, I will go over this very briefly, just for the sake of time. Think of any sort of physical, when we're not feeling well physically, we're not really doing well mentally. So physical illness, the food we eat, any sort of mood altering substances we do, the sleep we get, and the activity, that's essentially the acronym. Where are those areas? So a kiddo who's super anxious or really struggling to focus, I'm like, hey, are you getting enough sleep? 9 times out of 10 they are not. I'm like, the average teenager needs like 9 to 10 hours of sleep, y'all. And they're like, well, I have swim and I have school and I have homework. And I'm like, I get it, but like, how can we try and get some more sleep? What's gonna be helpful? So really trying to address those physical elements, not just the emotional elements as well. Riding the wave is essentially feeling our emotions. It's really the best way to put it. So when we have a sensation, when we have an urge that comes up, sometimes we want to fight it. I'm at school and I have a test coming up and I'm feeling really anxious and I'm about to cry and I want to just be like, no, I'm fine. Let me just push that aside. Let me get on TikTok. Let me do anything to avoid the emotion that I'm feeling because I don't want to feel anxious at school. I don't want to cry at school. And obviously there are definitely times, I'm sure we all have them in our own work day of like, I'm about to go in a meeting. I can't cry right now. Like, that's not professional. And that's super normal. However, there are times when we are allowed to feel our emotions and we should. So riding the wave is essentially just sitting, like if you think of the metaphor of sitting in the ocean, and instead of trying to swim against the waves, instead of trying to reach your feet on the ground, but then also keep your head above water, how can I just float through the highs and the lows of the sensations that are going on? This can be really good if we're having risky behavior urges. How can I notice that I really want to engage in this risky behavior, but not engage in it? How can I notice, oh, wow, it really sucks right now, and then, okay, it gets a little better. Oh, it really sucks right now, and okay, it gets a little bit better. How can we just feel all of that without necessarily acting on it? It's accepting that the emotion is there, it's not fighting it, it's not pushing it away, but it's not necessarily doing anything about it. It's really simple in theory and very difficult to actually do. I tell my kids all the time, like, I don't like feeling emotions either, and I'm a therapist. Like, this is my job. So I really try and, validate that it's really tough. Yeah, I was gonna do a brief example of that, but due to time, I'm gonna run for you. Cool. These next two are some of my favorite skills. Kids hate these. I don't like them. I really, when I talk about them, maybe this helps with the kids that say no to. When I teach DBT, yeah, it sucks. Like, I hate these skills, but they work and they're effective. But they're not fun. And so kind of joining them in the fact that like, yeah, I know we're gonna cope ahead again. Like, I hate it too, but. So check the facts and opposite action, they go a little bit hand in hand. Checking the facts is essentially, does my emotion fit the situation, or does my intensity fit the situation? So the example I was thinking of is, you have a kid, if you have more than one kid, they come home from school and their younger sibling went in their room and took something, a piece of clothing, a pencil, whatever. And they're like, oh my God, I can't believe you went in my room. I'm pissed. Like, that was a breach of my privacy. Or maybe they're mad at you for going in their room. As a breach of privacy, absolutely not. And so they fly off the handle. If we were gonna check the facts, first we might need to do some distress tolerance before we check the facts, because we might be a little bit dysregulated. But if we're able to cognitively go, okay, you know what, I am really upset that someone went into my room without asking me, they betrayed my privacy, and that is not okay. Does my feeling, okay, so first I gotta figure out, I feel angry, so emotional awareness. I feel angry that they went into my room. Okay, is it make sense for me to feel angry about this situation? Does it fit the facts? You know what? Yeah, I think it does actually fit the facts. It makes sense for me to be angry if someone impedes on my privacy. Cool. Now, does my intensity of my emotion, does flying off the handle, does screaming at my family, all of those things, does that fit the facts? You know what? I don't really like that they went into my room. I really, it wasn't okay. I feel like that's my safe space, that's my private space, but it doesn't really make sense for me to fly off the handle. That really doesn't get my needs met. That doesn't really communicate what I want. So yes, my emotion fits the facts, but the intensity of it does not. So maybe y'all can start to see it's a lot of thinking, a lot of processing, in order to determine, is our reaction appropriate for the situation? There are situations that maybe the emotion doesn't fit the facts. We feel so terrified about, just going to school on the first day. We're terrified that something bad is gonna happen. I mean, okay, maybe there's a little bit of fitting the facts in that situation, but if it's stopping us from like attending school, our anxiety is so high that we can't go to school, all right, that's not really fitting. How can we challenge ourselves by engaging in opposite action? So first we check the facts, we see how our emotion's doing, and then we go, do I need to do the opposite of what I naturally want to do? I want to fly off the handle, I want to skip school, whatever it may be. Is this helping me in the long term? Not really. It's actually making things worse, and I don't really want things to be worse, so I'm going to engage oppositely. I could go way into I'll show y'all resources at the end, or one specific resource, but all emotions have specific action urges that anger makes us want to attack, fear makes us want to run away, love makes us want to move towards. There are all these very natural urges that we experience when we have certain emotions, and they can be really informative, but not always helpful in the long term. That's what I'll say about that. Any questions? Is this somewhat making sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect. Yeah, take care. I want to try and do as much of an overview as possible, but also not get not too overview that it doesn't make sense, but not too in the weeds that it doesn't make sense. Okay, so we just talked about our emotion regulation skills. These are our cognitive skills. These are we want to be using these all the time. We want to be doing these day to day. There's probably ways that you all do them day to day, that your kids do them day to day. That's great. So now we're at the stage of, all right, the distress is so high that I'm dysregulated. What do? It's that moment when you find out someone went in your room and you're like, oh my God, I'm gonna fly off the handle. You don't even realize it, you're seeing red, you're shutting down. That's another, I think that can be super important for us to recognize is some of us externalize our emotions, we blow up, we act out, and some of us internalize, we shut down, we isolate. All of these can be demonstrations of high distress. So, distress tolerance is basically acknowledging that pain is a part of life. We can't avoid it. It would be really great if we could, but unfortunately we cannot. We have to acknowledge that there is challenge and there is difficulty. With pain, with painful emotions, with difficult emotions, we may experience urges to act in ways that are unhelpful. I like to call these maladaptive coping mechanisms because a lot of the times isolating, blowing up, engaging in risky behaviors like self-harm or substance use can make us feel better. Not in the long term, but in the short term. And so when we act impulsively on these maladaptive coping mechanisms, in the long term, it is actually very harmful for us because we're not thinking it all the way through. And essentially when we act impulsively, we may end up hurting ourselves or someone else. So what are some distress tolerance skills? Again, I love these. These are super easy to learn. Again, hard to practice, but easy to learn. We have another acronym, is TIP. So this should be on the back side of that pink worksheet. It should be distress tolerance on the top. I love that worksheet. I don't remember, I think I got it on like Teachers Pay Teachers. Oh, it's great. There's some great resources out there with all this information. So TIP stands for 4 different basic skills. The first one is temperature. So you can use hot temperature, but most effective is cold. When I worked in PHP, ice was a big thing. If someone's feeling dysregulated, hey, you need to go grab a bag of ice. You need to go splash some cold water on your face. This is a really easy and effective tool to help us regulate. I always mix up if it's the vagus nerve, vagal nerve, vagus.
I think so.
Okay. We have this nerve that runs from like the top of our head down our chest. And when you cool that nerve down, you'll naturally slow down your heart rate. So I think that's really cool. It's part of what we call the mammalian dive reflex. It's how whales are able to hold their breath for so long underwater because that nerve is cooled down, and so their heart rate is able to slow. So without even trying, without having to do anything, you put some ice on your forehead, on your chest. Some people like it on their wrist too. It's not necessarily connected to the nerve, but it can be helpful, and you can just very naturally slow your heart rate down, chill out a little bit. Okay, now that my heart rate's down, how do I proceed?
Can I add one thing to that?
Yeah.
Another one that's connected to this is I talk with kids and, I always joke that their dentist is probably gonna be mad at me, but, the kids that can take this anywhere is like putting ice in their mouth or sucking on ice. It's, similar. It's not totally the exact same touching the exact nerve, but that's another one that helps. And that's something that they can do in lots of other settings when they can't have the ice pack. But I think that that's a helpful one.
Totally. Yeah, anyway, pulling ice, holding ice, taking a wet rag, tying it in a knot and freezing it. This is big in like residential facilities, and then you work to untie it. So it's a very tactile activity. It's cold. I'm freezing an orange, and then you have the sense, the smell of the citrus and the orange, whatever your creative mind can think of that is cold, perfect. And I like to ask kids too, like, what do you think would be cool? They can come up with some creative ideas. So
This is
that's
where the
temperature.
ice plunge is coming from, right?
Oh.
The new challenge. It makes sense. It's like, yeah, it kind of makes me think of like in the summer when you jump into Barton Springs. Like I always feel so much calmer when I leave, and it's like, oh, now it all makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No.
There's that cold shower on at the end.
Of
Yeah.
course, of course. Yeah, I could get so, I love the physiological backings to a lot of this, because there's so much science. It's not just, magic. It's, there's all this science that backs it up, and it's like, oh yeah, it's like magic. So the I in tip is for intensive exercise. So when we're distressed, our body temperature goes up, our heart rate goes up, our breathing intensifies. These are all the same sensations as if we were working out. And so to help kind of, I'm using not sciencey terms, but to get to an equilibrium-ish state, raising our own physical activity to match our body's natural distressed state can actually help us regulate. We get moving, we get active. One thing you learn about distress tolerance is they're very physical. They're really not a lot of thinking. It really has to do with our senses, our body, etc. So get moving, do 10 jumping jacks, run down the street one time, whatever helps, whatever feels comfortable for your body. The P is we have paced breathing. So I love that they're teaching this more in schools, but just, like volcano breaths or, inhale, exhale, any sort of breathing technique that works for you, paced breathing is great. Some folks find that breathing can actually make us feel a little more dysregulated. I typically like to respond with yes, because you're paying a little more attention to your body, so you're actually paying attention to the distress you're feeling. So really normalizing it, but acknowledging, okay, paced breathing didn't work for you, let's try temperature instead. Let's try intensive exercise. There's a lot of options, and so testing them out and then practicing them can be super helpful. The last P is progressive muscle relaxation. Is anyone familiar with that? So it's the act of essentially when we're feeling stressed, we might get really tense, and so we essentially become very attuned to our body, and we tense our different muscle groups. So we maybe start with our hands. We tense our hands and then release them. And then we tense our forearms and then we release them. We tense our biceps. You can do small muscle groups like each finger. You can do big like the whole arm and release. But you essentially move through your body, tensing and releasing every muscle group to help you relax. Again, I'm someone who sometimes when I do progressive muscle relaxation, I get a little more stressed out. And sometimes it works really well. Sometimes I don't need to tense. I just need to focus on relaxing the body. And that can help. There's a lot of really great, if you YouTube, Google progressive muscle relaxation, you can find a lot of guided meditations for it that can be, some of them are a little longer, but I found some that are like 3 minutes that can be really helpful. Self-soothing. So like I said, the body is kind of where distress tolerance really lies. So 6 senses are smell, sight, touch, sound, taste, and then movement is the 6th one. So anything that can activate those senses. So an image that you really like that's really soothing to you. A minty gum or like a lemon head, something that gets you out of your brain and into your body. Anything to soothe your 6 senses or to activate your six senses is a great tool. We used to make these little like coping boxes or bags where I used to work, and we would try and get something for each sense that you could use at home with your family when there was dysregulation. So we'd have like a peppermint, we'd have like a nice lotion, we'd have like a soft texture, or like recognizing, hey, a pet is usually a really nice texture that we like to feel, an image of like a friend or a place that we really like. Anything to activate those senses, again, gets us out of our head and into our body, and that's really what distress tolerance is all about. Pros and cons is, as I'm sure many of you are familiar with, a traditional pros and cons list. However, this one is a little more in depth. It is a distress tolerance skill, even though it is more cognitive, so this is something you would want to do beforehand and then kind of reference it when you're feeling really distressed. So I like to think of typically, well, actually, we're going to do the example of skipping class, because that one's, I think, maybe a little more general. So your pros and cons list, it wouldn't just be pros of skipping class, cons of skipping class. You would make a box of 4 quadrants. And again, I was like, ooh, I'm gonna do like some examples, I'm gonna get more into this, and we're running out of time. So I like to chit chat a little bit. You make a quadrant and you do pros of skipping class, cons of skipping class, pros of attending class, and cons of attending class. And so you go through and you fill out as much as you can each of those 4 quadrants. I think what's really important to acknowledge, especially as parents, as teachers, as therapists, is that there are benefits to some of these maladaptive behaviors. That's why teens engage in them. There are benefits for them of skipping class. Yes, in the long term, we know it's not effective. We don't want them to do it. But it can be helpful to acknowledge, like, yeah, it makes sense. You want to skip class because class is boring, and then you get to go hang out with your friends. And, it's a long day. These kids are doing their academics, going to school. Well, those are the same thing. Doing their athletics, going to school, maybe doing more athletics, coming home, doing homework. I talk with my kids, I'm like, I don't miss high school. Like, it is a lot. Y'all are doing a lot. So that break of wanting to skip class makes sense. So essentially understanding all the consequences, good and bad, of every different behavior, and then going, okay, what is going to be the best long term for me to do? And when we're regulated, it can be a little helpful to figure that out, so that when we're dysregulated, we can remember, okay, yeah, I really want to skip class so I can hang out with my friends, but I do remember that a long-term consequence would be that, I might have to go to Saturday school, or I might not get as good of grades to go to the college that I want to, or to do what I want to, etc. And then lastly, I just put distraction. Some of the skills on the pink sheet might be like the acronym improves or accepts. These are all just distraction-based skills. Again, anything to get your headspace out of that stressor and move you into more of a regulated headspace. Distraction is great. Again, kids love distraction. Music, TikTok, Netflix, whatever you can. However, caveat, which I have over here, unless you pair distress tolerance with another skill, it becomes avoidance. So distress tolerance is great. Distraction, tips, self-soothe, all of these, awesome. But if we don't readdress the issue, then we're essentially just avoiding, and it builds up and builds up and builds up. So I really like to think of, if you're having an argument and you or your kid is really skillful and like, hey, I need a 5-minute breather, you walk away, you use some of your distress tolerance skills, and then you go back to the conversation. You don't just walk away and drop it for the rest of the day. You actually have to address the issue. You were talking about with your son, right? He's not thinking about what's going to happen in the future. Let's use some distress tolerance, and then, okay, how can we cope ahead for these things? Because the stressors are going to happen, and that's a part of life, unfortunately, and we have to deal with it. Any questions about those?
Where it says, like, pair distress tolerance with another skill, do you choose one of the, like, emotional regulation skills, or not
Yes.
another one of the distress tolerance? Like,
Yes, great question. Yeah, you want to use more of an emotion regulation skill, something that helps you address the actual issue rather than just like distract yourself from it. Any other questions? Perfect on timing. So, for more information, so this is the DBT Skills Manual for Adolescents. You can Google this and look for the PDF and find the whole manual. You can find all the DBT manuals online. I don't know if I'm supposed to be saying that, but that is what I do, and that's what I reference. The DBT Skills Manual for Adolescents has some really great worksheets I wouldn't say it's maybe the best for like teaching you how to use skills, but for the ones today, if you want to learn more, you can definitely check out the manual and be like, oh yeah, we talked about pros and cons. Here's that 4-piece quadrant that Kyla talked about. And as you learn more, if your child works with a therapist or works with a therapy group, you can recommend their therapist to use some of these skills if they have some training in it. And then if you have any other questions for me, my email is kyla@austinteentherapy.com. You're welcome to reach out. I enjoy DBT skills. I like talking about them. I think they're beneficial. And yeah, any final thoughts or questions?
I have a question there may not be an answer to.
All right.
What do you do? I have this grandson every summer. I had since he was 5, and I've had him living with us, or when my husband was alive, or me, 2 or 3 times in his life. Now, he used to read. Now it's all this. I know since his father died, I know it's an escape. I know it is. But that's the only thing, because he knows when he's with me, it's not going to be, he has friends that during the summer it's 24/7.
Yeah.
I'm like, what are these parents thinking? They just put him in a room and it's done. And I will not do that. And I tell him, I'm doing this because I love you, which, whatever. Do you have any recommendation for that? Because I think, now I'm older, I think we're losing a generation because they're in that little rabbit hole of both the phone. He listens to YouTube on his phone all the time. And that voice drives me insane. He may be saying the best things in the world, but it's just, whereas he used to read. So do you have any suggestions for that?
I think the biggest one is just setting limits and boundaries. I think every family is different as far as what boundaries look like, but the biggest thing I tell parents is just consistency. So whatever boundaries you set, keep them consistent for at least a couple weeks. If you need to change them, then change them. But it sounds like you're already somewhat.
Yeah, I don't know what his mother does. She's got her problems.
Yeah, and that's tricky when kids are in different houses, different guardians, etc. I think another thing that was mentioned is also, it could be asking about what they're on their phones. I'm going to be honest. I use TikTok. I love talking about the things I learn on TikTok. Are they factual? I don't know. Okay. But what is he listening to? Let's talk about it, and then maybe that can get him away from the phone for a little bit to have a conversation. Meet him where he's at a little bit. But yeah, boundaries and limits is, because it's pervasive. Can't get away from it.
Yeah, I feel sorry for young families. I really do. We had it a little bit. My youngest son is 39, and I remember I would hide the Game Boy, which none of you even know what that is. It was about, well, maybe y'all played with it. It was about this big, and I would take it away and hide it, and then of course I'd forget where I hid it. We never found it in the end, and that's become a family joke. But they were only allowed to be, but they were busy. They were scouts and sports.
Yeah.
So they only got to play video games, which I don't even know what they were back then. Friday night, Saturday if they weren't in sports, and a little bit Sunday, and then it was over. And that was it. So, but yeah, now it's everywhere. Plus they all have phones.
They do. And they're good at getting past all those parental, kids tell me all the time, oh, my mom doesn't know. I get that. And I'm like,
Right.
Yeah.
Do you guys do, so my son won't go see someone, right? So do you do training the parent more like one-on-one on a specific child, so then you can go home and try to institute some of the stuff?
Good question. So I do offer parent coaching. I don't have a lot of availability in my schedule right now, but could talk more about that. But individually, I'm trying to think, I don't know if any of our other associates offer parent coaching. I think a little bit, maybe not so much on DBT. But if that was something you were interested in, I could definitely connect you with myself or someone.
Okay.
Austin DBT Associates is a really great resource. They're all very DBT based. They do individual, they do group counseling, I believe they do parent coaching. But yeah, I could definitely help connect you with someone and find referrals or something, because yes, I think
Yeah, I think
That
he needs a
piece.
mix of DBT and some, is it
CBT.
Yeah, that also. Yeah,
Yeah,
but so I just need to talk to somebody.
yeah, of
Okay, good.
course, of course.
I was just gonna ask a similar question. I'd also heard about something called family DBT, where, like, I have twin 8-year-olds up to 16, and we're not there yet, but my teenagers are, but I'd like to kind of teach some of these skills before we get to the point of like, oh gosh, we need this now.
Totally.
And I'd heard of something called family DBT. Is that, where basically as a family, you're learning to
Yeah.
use these skills with each other.
Yeah.
Is that true? Does something like that exist? Or does this place offer something like that? I mean, I'm a little bit more of like, let's try to prevent what we can.
Totally, totally. I think that's a great place to start. I'm not familiar with something specifically like family-based DBT. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. There's so many more people that are way more versed in DBT than I am. But I mean, I don't feel.
I've never heard of it either, but you may be able to find a therapist that's willing to do,
Yeah.
you know, that's
Family therapy or family counseling, I
Yeah.
want us to all learn.
some
So
of the
we're kind of
skills.
consistent throughout,
Mhm.
right? You know?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I would hope though, if you could find, like a good family therapist could give you like CBT and DBT, I mean, like could give you just more other skills too, that's not only DBT, that could help.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And that could be, you know, something preventative, 'cause I think that that's would be good for kids and families too.
It's good skills to
Yeah.
have.
Do you have openings now, and do you accept insurance?
So personally, I don't accept insurance. I'm private pay. I have, my typical sessions are $135 a session for individual and $150 for parent or family. I do believe I have one possible sliding scale spot. My current availability is I have a Wednesday at 3 p.m. and Wednesday at 5 p.m. virtual, if that is.
Oh, you don't do in person?
I do, but they're all full. So, yeah, it is hard, but if you're looking for someone, again, I have some resources. I'm sure your school therapists also have resources.
Yeah, we're looking for in person.
Yeah, if you want to email me, I can help you find someone. Yeah.
What is CBT that y'all were mentioning?
Cognitive behavioral therapy.
Oh.
It's a little more of like a thought